Finland! The land of 300,000 lakes. The world's happiest miserable people. Salmiakki, sauna, the highest coffee consumption in the world. And above all, at least 3 million geeks. Yes, indeed, this backwards landmass squeezed between overly cheerly Swedes and the completely unexplainable phenomenon known as Russia has somehow managed to be one of the leaders of the digital era. Partially because of high levels of education, relative wealth, weather that definitely makes you want to stay indoors, but mostly because of good luck, Finland has managed to carve itself into a pretty notable niche of technology innovation. Amongst these innovations are text messages, SSH, Urwise, the world's first graphical web browser, wireless heart monitors, and last but not least, Linux. And these innovations not only come from Finland, a lot of these originate from this very building and campus behind me. But you know, screw these dorks, we're here to talk about games like proper YouTubers. Finland houses many important game studios that might have developed some games that you've heard of. Amongst these are Birds That Are Angry, Alan That Has Awoken, Skylines Equipped with Cities, Paint Max's Witch, but in Finnish, Questionable Automobiles of the Warm Season, Trialing in Many Incarnations, Festival of Wrecking, Clans That Keep on Clashing, the completely unpronounceable Star Wars, The Masters of Teräskäsi, and my favorite, Outing of the Flats. So as you can see, for a small country, Finland has quite a rich technological pedigree. And a lot of how that started was with people in the 90s and early 2000s starting making games on their DOS systems for fun and distributing them for free online. And a lot of those people are still at it and behind some of the games I just mentioned. These games originally lived on BBSs and various websites, but the big change happened in 2001 when the portal suomipelit.com, meaning Finland Games, was launched, and now these games had a place to grow community around. The website met its doom in 2010, but the admins were farsighted enough to dump the entire games database online. And that is the dataset that these videos are covering. Now, my original idea for this project was to do one mammoth video that's like 5 or 6 hours long where I go through the entire database of the games. But turns out that when you're a bit older and you have a part-time job and massive RSI, that's just not feasible even with the year of production that I gave it. So what I'm going to do instead is go through the first 20 and make this into an ongoing series of videos featuring this database. The series will probably update very, very infrequently, but you know, it's what it is. But I'm going to go through the first 20 games, and the order, because these are DOS games only, is going to be based on the name of the zip file that it was distributed as, not the actual name of the game, because of course. So, on with the games! AUTS, the ultimate stress relief game, by Jaakko Lyytinen. This genre was remarkably popular and prevalent in the Findie scene, and we will probably see another recurrence of this theme within this video. AUTS, translating as, well, ouch, was the first exposure to the genre for many people, at least within my circle of friends. The order of which we found these had a lot more to do with whatever floppies were circling around amongst us rather than the order in which they came out. You fly 2 to 4 triangles around intricate maps trying to fight each other as much as you can, while the gravity always pulls you down as well as the relentless collision damage is there lurking for you. The only thing to help you are these lighter colored platforms that you can land on to refill your ammo and, most importantly, fix your damage. However, if you are being shot at the same time, you will still die since the repair speed will not outweigh incoming damage fast enough. These games make for excellent action fun, as simple as the basic premise seems to be. AUTS being, if not the first, then amongst the first ones, is probably the simpler ones of the popular ones. The maps are a tad small and lacking in detail and secrets, but you do have these little dudes running around that, as far as I know, don't have a purpose beyond being there to make an amusing sound when they get killed as collateral damage. Yo! In this game you can also inject and run around in case your ship is about to explode, but I do not have footage of this due to my personal technical limitation of having no friends. AUTS makes for an excellent example of, but not the most enthralling version of this particular gameplay loop, but it covers the basics. And most importantly, it handles the gravity and buoyancy modeling well, which is one of the core tenets of this genre. Another important facet is that everything except the outer edges are completely destroyable, giving the battle a slight tactical twist. However, the way these games used to go is that the collision damage would kill you off before any actual gunfire took place. Attack! By Juha Vesanen. Didn't I tell you we'd have a lot of these? Attack is another example of the very same mechanics, this time much later and therefore featuring a higher resolution video mode. Another major difference is that this game is freeware as opposed to the shareware model of the earlier, more popular outings. Attack seems to be a pretty basic retread of the same design, with mainly some differences in the visual presentation. The minimap makes it much easier to find your opponent, and you can see health meters of your systems and not just your overall health. Unusually, your main weapon can also run out of ammo, requiring more frequent landings. The levels also have some fun interactive destroyables and gravity effects on water. Unfortunately, beyond that, the game doesn't offer anything particularly interesting and seems to have come out after the heyday of the genre. The uninspired stage designs don't help the cause either, although it does come with a level editor. Beerworm, trademark, by Mikko Nurmi. Beerworm is our first entry into the juvenile humor category, including the title mentioning that it is trademark, while it most certainly is not. Yes! For some reason we thought in the 90s that calling something trademarked was hilarious. Even me, although I can't imagine why. The gameplay is simple. It's a traditional Worms game with the added twist that you are collecting beers in a bar and the goal is to get as drunk as possible. This juvenile frivolity was no doubt all the more hilarious because the makers and most players at the time were too young to have really been drunk at that stage. But toying with the idea of reckless alcoholism is indeed an important part of role-playing as adults, which probably tells you a lot about the unhealthy Finnish drinking culture. In any case, the twist to the standard worm game format is that your worm gets increasingly drunk as you consume more beers, and that makes it swivel and not stay at the usual 90-degree angles. And this actually does make the gameplay more interesting, since doing tight turns and going parallel to yourself is much more harrowing and dangerous than it would be in a standard game of this type. Fortunately, there are power-ups in the shape of medkits and mustaches that help you regain normal function momentarily. If you get drunk enough, you enter the high score in the form of signing a receipt. The Finnishness here is underlined in the form of Finnish beer brands being featured, but also in how the author has assumed the English word for blood alcohol level to be promille, as in Finnish, probably exclaiming your inuberation level as promilles, whatever those are. Beez by Deep Connection. Beez is a very typical 16-bit era action platformer. A slight puzzle element comes from the stamina meter on the user wings, which is usually just short enough to get you where you're trying to get to, making you search for platforms that allow you to progress. This becomes quite tedious quite fast, and I wasn't able to get far in the relentless barrage of enemies one or two-shotting me. And to top it off, death will take you back to the start of the level, and after you lose your 3 Beez, there are no continues. Therefore, I shall not continue either. But for a freeware game by 2 hobbyists, it is quite impressive. Brixor II Edition by V.M. Österman. Brixor is a vamp on Breakout. It bolsters a strategy element that you can disable from the menu, thus making it into a regular clone of the classic arcade romp. But since the variation into the regular form is offered by the strategy portions, that is what we'll be playing. In this game, when the ball hits a block, it releases a pellet that can be collected. At first, it's not very clear as to what these pellets will do, but you collect them as currency that you can use in the store between the levels. Getting there is a bit of a chore though. These levels are very long with a lot of breaks and a fairly lazy ball speed. It took me a while to even get to the strategy elements, as the levels are long enough that often I ended up game overing before clearing one. It doesn't help that the paddle exerts a minimal amount of influence into the direction of the ball itself, which makes risky strategies necessary. This might be more realistic in terms of mathematical calculation of angles, but it makes the game into a bit of a chore. It sounds that I'm overly harsh, since mainly these games that I'm covering here are learning tools for beginner programmers and game designers, and I tend to take that into account. But in this case, quite a lot of benefit of a doubt gets thrown out the window, since this is a shareware title with a fairly ambitious asking price of €10. And that makes me approach it as I would any commercial release, and this simply does not cut it. There are far better alternatives with breakout variants for DOS at the time. Operation Cleaner by Nyman. This game is an absolute delight. Very simple and slightly clunky in its user interface, but oh so much fun. It may be called Operation Cleaner, but it is not about cleaning. It's about wrecking shit and getting paid for it. Hooray! You're managing and operating a buildings demolition company, moving from city to city and taking on jobs larger and smaller to make profit in controlled rubbling of various structures made with materials of varying properties. That was a long sentence. There is a mild management aspect to the game, as you need to buy materials, equipment, and hire workers to make the job go faster. But in all honesty, the money in this game flows so easily that you can just keep buying and hiring without a care in the world. To some people this might be a detriment, but I highly prefer the game sticking to its lane and just dealing with the demolitions. The modeling of the structures is a bit kooky, since even the tiniest piece of wall keeping it on the ground will prevent the building from collapsing. But this makes it all the more satisfying to overload the charges to make total destruction assured. You do need to make sure not to damage neighboring properties, but the financial penalties are quite reasonable, and it is actually quite hard to cause damage. The game includes 4 different types of explosives that you can use, but I haven't found the need for any other than the dynamite for weaker materials and the C4 for the stronger stuff. Admittedly, the gameplay loop gets quite repetitive, but watching the demolitions model do its thing is very pleasant in spurts. As said earlier, the weakest part of the design is the UI, where everything takes a few clicks more than required, but that is understandable from an amateur games designer. Indeed, while I have criticized some of the earlier games for falling down the trap where the game is too hard and convoluted and asking for money, this game represents the best of the scene. A free game showcasing the skills of the developer in a fun manner, so that the more unpolished aspects are easy to set aside while having good old fun. Cyber Antero by Thought. Demoscene legends Thought bring a simple game which I'm highly suspecting to be for a game jam, possibly at the legendary scene event Assembly. A very simple game. You play as the titular cybernetic Antero, catching elements as they fall from the top of the screen while a child reads out the numbers of the said elements. Your goal is simply to gather as many elements and dodge the ones that will kill you on contact. Do well or start a fresh install of the game and you will be rewarded with a place in the top 10. Not a lot to say about this one. Controls are simple but responsive. Moving side to side with the arrow keys does remind one of the times before the dominance of WASD, a superior but superfluous control scheme. Antero, by the way, is a common Finnish male name, so my guess would be that the child providing the voice is somebody called Antero, quite likely a relative of the author. Down by the Laituri by Schizo Productions. Down by the Laituri, or Down by the Pier in English, is a hard game to talk about as it is one of my absolute favorite Findie games of all time. I have spent so many hours in my life playing this addictive but truly hard game over the years by placing artists on the simplified map of Turku, Finland's former capital. Unfortunately, these days the game is getting rather hard to recommend even to Finnish people, let alone people from other places. This game is a relic of a time and a place that no longer exists. The bands featured are of their time. Some of the performers have died and the bands disbanded. And even those that still exist and are known are situated in a completely different cultural context than where they were in 1997. So it is quite hard to make informed decisions on the placement of the artist to specific locations. The highlight of the game still is when planning is over and the interactive dialogue tells you how well you did. Mostly I do terribly though, and even on the easy setting I find it quite hard to make any profitable bookings. In fact, I don't think I've ever made a profit in this game. The real Down by the Laituri still exists though. Unfortunately for people who don't read Finnish, this is actually a completely impossible game to play as it is entirely in Finnish and undecipherable for everyone else. And for Finnish people under 40, the cultural references are as well. So this game can only exist as a relic of nostalgia. Death Rally by Remedy Entertainment. Now here we find a true legend. It might be a bit weird at first to label something published by Apogee with their shareware model as Findie, but this game did indeed start production in the basement of one of the lead developers. This group indeed was already legendary in the demo scene as the one and only Future Crew, but now deciding to put their efforts into making games, they would become one of the most successful game studios in Finnish history. But Max Payne, Alan Wake and Control would have to wait as first up was the vehicular manslaughter and combat game Death Rally. The gameplay loop is simple but weirdly satisfying. You complete races, you upgrade your cars, and you buy more weapons from the black market dealers. The races are also spiced up with random drops on track. The top-down perspective was pretty standard at the time, though quite aged at this point. However, the biggest problem in the game are the controls. The cars do not turn particularly well and the sprites are very static. Colliding with anything stops you on your tracks and takes away all your momentum. Drifting, sliding, or otherwise speeding up your car with tricks is not a thing here. The combat is limited to just holding down the fire button while somebody is in front of you. Very successful on its day and still a fascinating relic, it's not a wonder Remedy created their true legacy with something other than racing games. The combat racer was a very popular genre back in its day, and while this was the most commercially successful title of its kind from the Findie scene, it is not the best. The full version these days is available on Steam for free though. Deluxe Ski Jump 2.1 by Jussi Koskela. Deluxe Ski Jump is another one that I remember fondly, though the first one rather than the second one. And as it was back in the day, the control scheme still baffles me to no end. At its core, the mouse-driven action where you control the launch, jump, flying position, and landing is good, but putting it all together in one jump is rather perplexing and challenging. I do remember quite a few of my friends figuring it out though and making glorious jumps. The core gameplay is extremely simple. You jump. The one who jumped the jumpiest wins the jumping. A fun distraction, clearly a big success for the developer as it continued on to Windows and beyond. It never got further than being a curiosity for me. The limited mechanics can only hold one for so long. However, I am the weird one out. One must commend Jussi Koskela, the sole developer, as he is still at it. The latest version of the game was released in 2011, the version number 4, but he is still maintaining and developing it. The newest update is from November 2025, and he makes personal appearance in Polish events promoting the game. Indeed, the game seems to have garnered the most loyal following in Poland. And there also seems to be a lively online competitive scene around it, so clearly a lot of people vibe with it a lot better than me. Duck, Mr. Duck by Dan Anders Strömberg and Patrick Carlsson. Duck is, as is very clearly noticeable, a Worms clone. Unfortunately, a very poor Worms clone in that the controls are fairly cumbersome with both arrow keys and mouse actions being necessary, while the Duck's control with the grace of recommissioned Soviet tanks. As a practice game for future developers, the graphics are nice, and the animations have quite a lot of charm to them every now and then, but the controls kill all the enjoyment out of the game. Even more cumbersome than trying to shoot and kill enemies is the camera control. The game never centers on the active player, so it is really hard a lot of the time to even find who the active duck is. And more often than not, a point-blank shot is either started from the wrong side of the target or the weapon fires at a completely unexpected direction. The biggest flaw though, it's Worms. And Worms has never really vibed with me. Emancy, The Revenge of the Tamanduas by Vesa Oinonen, Tomi Tukiainen, Kimmo Karvinen, Kimmo Palander, Mikki Penttinen, and Niko Tukiainen. Well, here we go, another genre staple of the scene, a top-down shooter game. This one seems quite different from the usual ones though. Instead of linear levels, you go through a campaign of different arenas where you can hire as many soldiers as you think you need, and then give control to humans or computers as you see fit, and how many friends you happen to have. In my case, again, no friends. I'm playing this single player. It's an interesting presentation with SVGA graphics, but the highlight is definitely the completely over-the-top sound effects for the deaths of both the player and the computer characters. The gunplay itself is a bit challenging though. All the weapons have long reload timers, the hitboxes seem to be very strict, and the computer opponents do not give you any slack. It is very competent in what it does though, and the levels offer a nice variety of environments both in terms of gameplay and visual style. If the game wasn't quite as ruthless in its difficulty, I'm sure it could have been a contender as a single player game. As a massive multiplayer though, I think it's probably tons of fun. Holiday Serpent by Puavohard. Our first holiday themed game, and well, in this collection, the last. Variations on snake games is another thing that I'm usually surprised we haven't seen even more during this retrospective, because those were, and I believe still are, popular games for beginning programmers. Holiday Serpent has a nice presentation and good graphics, but the problem with these snake variants is that if you break the grid-like navigation, the control becomes quite hard, and you can see that from my initial failures. The game also moves very fast, and the free steering makes it very hard to make precise turns, which is quite key to the core gameplay. Adding to the difficulty is also the fact that the tail of your serpent blends into the background a bit too easily, and I found myself hitting my tail without even clocking the fact that it was there. Once I figured out the strategy, I could get a better score though. With the serpent moving this fast, the only real strategy was to make as wide a circle as possible and only pick up the matured flowers, then return to that said circle. There are a bunch of pickups, but the only thing you need to know is to avoid everything except the flowers. And if it's not blooming, avoid those too. The music and the graphic style, aside from the blending in, is super nice though. The gameplay just needed a few more tweaks. Javelin 2000 by Kimmo Ollila. This game really shouldn't be as much fun with such a basic premise as it turns out to be. You can throw a javelin. The javelin go plonk. You do all this with a single button. You can't affect the running or the power of the throw. You can only pick when to go, what the angle of the throw is, and when to do the throw. All with the spacebar. And yet it took me ridiculously long time to figure out the controls because there is no documentation explaining the system, and my brain refused to believe it was so simple, so I kept not getting any proper throws done. But once I did, I had a heck of a lot of fun. So the controls are: the first push starts the run, the second starts the lifting of the angle, the third throws. And that's all you do. But the really clear pixel art, the smoothness of the animations, and the amount of satisfaction you get from a successful throw are off the charts. I played way more rounds of this than I originally intended, and I can only imagine how much fun this would be as a party game. The only downside is the lack of sound, and ideally the run-up of the throw could do with meter boards, but the parallaxing ad boards in the background also worked as a reference. Apparently this also used to have a mechanic where if you get a throw of over 100 meters, you could submit the score to the author's website. Obviously I had to check, but alas, the service is no longer available. Who knows, maybe I broke the record. Joe by Warp. I feel like I've been overly negative to a lot of the games as I go along, and I really don't want to be. But holy moly, this was the first game on this set that I truly hated. I didn't play it for very long, but it felt like I wanted to chuck my monitor into the trash in just a few minutes into this. It all comes down to the controls. The level is based on a grid, and the left or right key moves you one grid position to left or to the right. The up key then makes you jump forward in a predetermined arc for a set amount of grids, and you have zero control during the jump. This makes it into a puzzle game where you just have to count the grids and make extremely precise jumps over and over to avoid the insta-kill mines around the level. Not bad idea as such, but the grids are very tiny and the jumps are so long that they're visually hard to keep track of. This footage is my genuine effort to clear the first level, but I just couldn't get there. I couldn't even get near the first collectible. I feel like I was doing nothing but battling the controls, and that left me frustrated and anxious. Koiratappelu 2 Taistelumme by Interactive Attraction. Now this is a game type I really do enjoy quite a lot. A simple 2D dogfighting game where you use the left and right key to go up and down and have hectic action. And this is not a bad example of it. In fact, it has a couple of features that I haven't encountered before. The main one of these less seen features is the fact that your plane stalls really easily and you need quite a lot of clearance from the ground to recover from it. It's very accurate to these kinds of planes, and you really have to take your time to gather height. The second one is the most obvious to the viewer, and that is the announcer making a sports-style play-by-play in a chipmunk voice. And I have to hand it to them. The play-by-play is quite informative and it helps keep track of the action. The animation is fun too. The wrenches up in the air give you various bonuses which go from giving you health to other guns, though it won't tell you what it does until you find out. The up arrow stops and starts your shooting, but honestly there is no reason to stop shooting. The down arrow is apparently an action key, but what it does I cannot tell you. Again, a game that most definitely would benefit from playing with actual humans rather than just CPU opponents, but even then it's a solid fun game. Lada, the ultimate challenge by Cadaver. Lada, for those of you not in the know, used to be a legendary Soviet car manufacturer. I mean, it still exists, but it's not quite as legendary anymore. The reason why they have a mythical status in Finland is that it was a cheap car, simple enough to usually fix with a hammer, and it would start even at the most extreme of temperatures. So naturally it was made into this delightful little card combat game. I remember playing this as a teen and I just couldn't get the handle on it. But this time playing around it though, I clocked it and I had tons of fun. Back then the hectic nature of the chaotic bouncing around really frustrated me, but for some reason this time I got the point and I embraced the chaos. The game is set in the far future dystopia of 2020, where the world is in ruins and everyone drives like maniacs. Your goal is to reach the mythical Lada factories to bring balance back into the world and return the peace and order. Good luck doing that though, because you bounce around like a maniac and touching anything and everything will make your health go away. Well, there are other obstacles on the way. The biggest hurdle is the scenery. If you hit a tree head-on or even the tiniest rock, you immediately explode. Fortunately, so will the other drivers, so you can use that to your advantage. You are also the only one equipped with guns to help clear your path. The ammo is scarce though, so you need to keep an eye on loot boxes on the road. You can slow down or speed up, but it's impossible to go reverse. Therefore, if you miss one, you've missed it. It's been almost 30 years of me playing this game on and off, and I've yet to reach the Lada factory. Maybe one day. But meanwhile, this is not far off from the insanity that was the year 2020, so not bad. And there you have it. Those were the games for this December. Come back next year, maybe I'll do some other games, maybe I'll do something else. Leave comments, do the engagey things, and look, if you like this kind of thing, just, subscribe and all. Oh, I don't care.